first real episode of 2026. We've got NFL job openings, 8 of them, and we are going to take a quick dive into each one. So let's talk about it. Welcome everyone to Outsider Information, exploration through storytelling. First real episode of 2026. We did the report last week, but this is the first one that we're really putting all the branding with. So if you're returning or if you're brand new, just hang out, get cozy. If you're into the vibe, like, subscribe, engage. I try to do this once a week, usually on a Tuesday. Now, as always, we've got a drink of the episode is the tea of the month from the newsletter, the Midnight Revelry. Yes, Outsider Information can be delivered to your inbox once a month, along with a recipe for a quality cup of tea, and it hopefully adds a little bit of pragmatic positivity to your flow. All right. As many of you know, I am a sports guy. I have not made that a secret. Shoot, my bios on social media say sports, business, life. It is a prism of how I view the world. And of course, I was a coach for 10 years, youth college. You probably know all that as well. So when I often go into these topics, it's less about the pure sports of it all and more about the broader dynamics, the implications, and the reasoning behind why certain things happen the way that they do. This particular space has essentially turned into a research arm. That is what I've really converted my business to over the last few months. So the goal is perspective, not necessarily influence. I try to look at historical precedent in addition to modern trends when conducting any analysis. So on that note, we are going to be taking a look at the head coaching vacancies in this NFL cycle. Some historical context on that. We've got about average 25% of the league turns over its teams each year. So 32 teams in the league, about 8 openings a year. And as I'm recording this now on a Monday, we are at that exact number at 8. I believe it still could get to 8 or to 9 or 10 before the end of the divisional weekend. So we will touch on those later. But for right now, we have got 8 openings. I did a YouTube short classifying the 3 different types of coaching changes. Coach gets fired, the GM stays. The GM gets fired, the coach stays, and then the clean sweep in which the coach and GM are both fired at the same time. When we look at all of these openings, we're going to look at how the team got here. We're going to look at ownership, some history in general, the front office situation, the quarterback situation, and the cap dollars. It sounds like a lot, but it'll go quick once we get rolling. So 8 openings, and we're going to rank them in order from best down to the worst one. Starting with the Baltimore Ravens. So after 18 seasons, 12 playoff appearances, and a Super Bowl win, the Ravens parted ways with head coach John Harbaugh. And this firing mirrors many throughout NFL history when a team is just stuck in a situation that they can't get over. Marty Schottenheimer, Dan Reeves, John Fox, back before the Broncos won their most recent Super Bowl. When you are a constant contender, but you fail to actually get through the championship door, there is a natural pathway towards splitting apart. That is how we got here. And this, along with many others, this was my Super Bowl pick. And it just never got going. Started off 1-5 and came on strong, but still finished 8-9. And honestly, had they just made the field goal in week 18, we're probably not having this conversation. But we are here, and the Ravens are looking for a new coach. Now, Baltimore is one of the newer franchises in the NFL. The Ravens are. The Colts were in Baltimore. They're in Indy. But the Baltimore Ravens are one of the newer franchises in the NFL. So in historical context, we have a pretty small sample size of how they hire coaches. Now, ownership is among the best in the NFL. Since 1996, they've only had 3 head coaches in their history. Stable front office, and of course, they've got a 2-time MVP in Lamar Jackson at quarterback. They've also got a decent amount of cap room at $36 million to spend this offseason, and that is before they do any adjustments on contracts, cut players to potentially add more. So the analysis for any job, these jobs are jobs that we take in life. You have to weigh the pros and cons, the positives and negatives, factoring in everything that exists about the situation. Recent history for the Baltimore Ravens shows this is a stable job. 3 coaches since 1996 is an unprecedented level of stability when you consider what the NFL is and teams who tend to cycle through coaches every 2 to 4 years. They know how to hire. they know how to develop, and their down years are some of the teams in the NFL best year that they would have in years, if I said that right. Right? Most teams would take a Baltimore Ravens down year because they are usually better than most of their good years. That got more convoluted than I wanted it to. Anyway, moving on. The negatives about this job is that the expectation is you are going to be winning a championship in short order, either the first or second year that the coach is in. And we exist in a world where people are expected, at times unrealistically, to be hired and perform instantaneously. However, this is a job where the floor is a Super Bowl appearance, and that requires a certain kind of coach. The positives are the same as the negatives. Usually when a job opens up in a sports context, they're not great jobs. They are teams that need to be rebuilt, and they are often not very good and probably won't be for a couple of years. The Ravens, again, have a two-time MVP at quarterback and Lamar Jackson, stable ownership, and a philosophically grounded front office. There are only 32 of these jobs in the world, and everybody would want to take this job. So the Ravens, they're going to get whoever they want to take it. No job is perfect, but this is certainly one of the best jobs to come open in recent NFL history. And after this one, there's a pretty significant drop-off in the quality of jobs. They all have flaws, whether in how the firing was done, who remains, the history of the team, or the state of the roster. If I was a candidate with choices, I would honestly wait until next year's coaching cycle where there could be some more attractive jobs that open up. But we got to go through the list. So Baltimore Ravens are in a tier all their own. Tier number 2 has a couple of teams as well. And my second rated job is probably going to surprise you, but it is the Las Vegas Raiders. All right. So the last few seasons, sorry, I had to make sure we stay good to go here. The last few seasons, the Las Vegas Raiders have been guilty of grossly overestimating their status as a contending team. They always thought they were closer to contention than reality. Since 2018, 5 different people have had the title of head coach, including interims in the building. So whoever they hire in the coming weeks will be their 6th coach in that time span. It is impossible to have any organizational stability with that much coaching turnover. And that rests with ownership, not just Mark Davis, but the new person who's going to be directing the search in Tom Brady. I've got a lot of thoughts on Tom Brady as an owner, also factoring in his time with Fox as a broadcaster. But there's going to be a point in time where we're going to have to start holding Tom Brady accountable because we often associate greatness with being great at other things, and that is rarely the case. Greatness exists in the medium that it does because that individual can focus exclusively on that aspect of their life. Tom Brady is the greatest quarterback in NFL history and will likely be that for the rest of my lifetime. Will he be a great owner? We have history to show that the GOAT doesn't always translate to other aspects of an operation. See Michael Jordan with the Charlotte Hornets. Now, the Raiders fired Pete Carroll after one awful season. They kept their general manager, and that resulted in the number 1 pick in the upcoming draft. They will be taking a quarterback with that pick, and they also have the 2nd most cap space in the NFL, projected with over $100 million. So they will have money to spend to build the roster. The question is, will they have to overpay to get people to come play for Las Vegas? Unfortunately, this is the 2nd best job in my opinion. The GM is mostly unproven, so we have no evidence to show if they're going to do the job properly, spend the money, draft the right players. The biggest negative is the organization as a whole. Ownership is shaky, the division is stacked, and it is a true rebuild. But the positives, you certainly have the resources to build it. And if you're given the timeline to do so, coaches really do factor that in when they look at jobs. Are they going to be able to actually make it through the life of their contract? It's a very perilous job. Coaches take roles knowing that their mortality is going to be facing them every single day they walk in the building. So they're going to have to really put the sales pitch on to let a coach know that if you come here, you're going to get to do this the right way. I would have a hard time as an established coach on the market wanting this job, especially after seeing a potential Hall of Fame coach in Pete Carroll end up getting one and done and find himself out of a job this season. All right, so on to the next. The New York Giants. I have this as the 3rd best job available. And the New York Giants, there's a lot of nuance with the New York Giants. They have legacy ownership. They have a storied history. They even have a playoff appearance and a win in the last 5 years. But what they also have is a general manager who at best is on shaky ground and has made questionable decisions that have put them in the position that they are in right now. Since 2022, when Joe Schoen, who's the general manager, took over with former head coach Brian Daboll, who was fired midpoint this season, it has been a steady decline. They had the one outlier year in 2022. They made the playoffs, and since then, it has gotten progressively worse. Why this matters is those two were hired together, tying them together from their time in Buffalo. It would be reasonable to say that they are equally responsible for what has transpired over the last few years, but the team has opted to keep the general manager, Joe Schoen, in place. And if we have seen anything in recent history, that could be a problem for long-term stability. When we look back at last year, the Jacksonville Jaguars, they had a similar arrangement where they fired their coach, but they kept GM Trent Baalke. And it was an impediment to getting the coaches that they wanted because nobody wanted to work with them. It ended up being a little bit embarrassing, and they ultimately had to fire the general manager, getting their guy and pairing him with a general manager that he felt like he could work here. That could be the same problem that the Giants have, and it could easily happen. So the best thing that could potentially happen is that the same scenario happens. It worked out well for Jacksonville, but if they keep the status quo, in a year or two, this new coach could be finding himself working for a general manager that they may not know or they may not want to work with because they opted not to go for the clean sweep. It creates a very different kind of instability, I guess is where I'm going at. When you keep a GM on shaky ground and they're making their second hire, if it doesn't work out, you end up in my least favorite scenario, which is GM gets fired, coach stays, and you end up pairing the coach with a general manager without giving him more say in personnel. It creates a whole lot of problems. All right. The negatives are the quarterback situation for a few reasons. And I know people are going to think that that's crazy. Jackson Dart looked like he could potentially be a good player in the league. Look, quarterbacks are very much eye of the beholder, and the GM that drafted him is still in place, and they're going to want a coach that can make it work. There was also no real consensus on the quarterbacks last year. So, look, we've all said what we've needed to say in interviews to get the job. This rarely works out well for the coaches that do it. So if you get a coach that is not bought in on Jackson Dart as the quarterback, ultimately they're going to be trying their best to push this player out. The GM is going to want them to stay because both of them are going to be fighting to justify the reason to keep their jobs. Again, it can get really messy. It's still a New York market, and while they aren't the epitome of dysfunction, and they haven't cycled through coaches like all the other teams since 2016, they have had 5 coaches hold the role of head coach. This would be their 6th. Again, it's a job with some nuance. I think the Giants' job is an okay one. It's going to have to be the right coach. The positives, you have most of your draft picks. You have a young core. You have good enough ownership. The division isn't the hardest. Realistically, the right moves and good coaching, this team could be in the playoffs next year, especially when you look at how the Eagles crashed and burned just a couple of days ago in the wild card round. They have cap space around $18 million. A lot of players on rookie deals. Again, is it a good job? No, but is it one that a good coach could make a potentially great situation? I think yes. All right. So that's really it. That's the second tier. I think the Raiders and the Giants there's not a lot of great jobs this cycle. And it's starting to get a lot harder because I think there's a real drop off in the quality of job available. And these next ones, eye of the beholder. That's kind of where I would say it. Eye of the beholder. So the one that I have ranked 4th, and this might spark some disagreement as we get into the list, but the Tennessee Titans. Every few years, teams draw straws for the one that is the most dysfunctional. The Tennessee Titans currently have that label. It's never a good sign when you draft a quarterback first overall and then midway through the second year or midway through the first year of that quarterback-coach relationship, you fire the coach, and the Titans have been suffering from a lack of alignment really since the 2022 season. 3 head coaches, including interims, 4 general managers, including interims, all in that time. Historically, they are not a bad franchise, but recent ownership with Amy Adams Strunk has taken it to a place where people don't view them very highly. Impulsive decisions, a lack of general foresight and chronic instability, as you can see over the last couple of years. Case in point, Mike Vrabel, who is now leading the Patriots into the divisional round in his first season with the Patriots. That was their coach. He had them as the 1 seed at one point. And it's impossible to know how the front office functions because there's no real blueprint of it. They've just cycled through people the last couple of years. So this is really a clean slate. And that's, again, it's not a bad thing, but it does create a whole lot of unknowns paired with what has really looked like a lot of dysfunction coming in from the outside. They did draft a quarterback last year with the first overall pick, and while it was rough, we've also seen what the impact of good coaching can have on young quarterbacks. But who's picking the rest of the roster? If the determination is that Cam Ward is not the guy, then what? Will they get to go pick another quarterback, or will it be the end of their coaching career? On the bright side, the team has the most cap space in the NFL, around $110 million. So they can, like the Raiders, rebuild pretty quickly if they spend the money wisely. There's a new stadium coming in 2027, and that's enough to say that the job could be good if the Titans do what the Texans did a couple of years ago when they were the most dysfunctional team in the NFL, and that's stop listening to so many different voices. All right, the Tennessee Titans, I think, have a lot to work with here. It's a good city. It's a good fan base. They've just got to put some things together. All right. Number 5, and these last ones, I'd say 5 through 7, probably the biggest toss-up because they all have traits that are desirable, but they all have fatal flaws as well. And I have Cleveland number 5 because of how great that defense is. If they had a middle-of-the-pack offense, they probably make the playoffs this year and could have won the division. But if a 2-time coach of the year couldn't make it work in Cleveland, who could? Now I have real questions about keeping the general manager and not the coach. That is, unless the owner is responsible for the disaster at the quarterback position, which I believe he is. Baker Mayfield clearly wasn't the issue. Deshaun Watson, he hasn't been on the field enough, and the 2 rookies this year did just enough to show that they're NFL quarterbacks, and that might be it. This version of the Browns has been historically awful. 3 playoff appearances since 1999, over 40 different starting quarterbacks, and their recent bout of stability still resulted in head coach Kevin Stefanski losing his job. Ownership is the biggest question for me because to be this bad all the time speaks to failure at the top. At the very minimum, it speaks to failure at the top. Many promising coaches and players have seen their careers die in short order once they arrive in Cleveland. Again, Kevin Stefanski was a 2-time coach of the year. If he can't make it work, then who? Now, I will say this. As bad as the quarterback situation is with the Deshaun Watson contract, we have seen in recent years how you can maneuver that. See the Denver Broncos. If you get the right coach in place and can ride out the cap hit from a really bad contract, you can have success. Cleveland also has 2 first-round picks this year. Cap situation isn't that great, $3 million, but they are not in the red. And of course, teams know how to move money around when they have to. So that job for me is number 5. Number 6, and again, 5 through 7, no particular order on this. My view on the Dolphins has shifted quite a bit. When they fired GM Chris Greer in the middle of the season, but they kept head coach Mike McDaniel, to me it didn't make a whole lot of sense considering who their coach is. Their coach, while I think he is a good coach, was not going to be the preferred choice of many general managers, and I don't advocate for coaches to get fired, but if you fire a general manager and keep the coach, unless you give the coach a bigger role in personnel, a bigger voice in personnel, you're delaying the inevitable, which is that coach being fired by the next GM. It was a bad season for the Dolphins, but I projected top 5. And it was among many things I got wrong this year. I did get some stuff right, but I did get some stuff blatantly wrong. But it wasn't as bad for the Dolphins as it could have been. And they were on that top 5 trajectory. But credit to them, they did fight down the stretch, and ultimately, they were just a flawed team. Culturally, there is certainly something off here, and there has been for years. Dating back to Joe Philbin in the mid-2010s. This is a team that heavily relies on the fact that they have great weather for playing, living. They have no state income tax. They can lure people in to play in Miami, but they haven't really developed their own players in the same way. Even the couple of good years under Mike McDaniel fell short, and he was the one that embraced and coached up Tua Tagovailoa, a quarterback with real limitations. And that quarterback is still on the roster. But again, we have seen in recent times a team like Denver get out from under a bad quarterback contract and move the team forward. So anyway, after the season ended, a few days after it ended, Mike McDaniel was fired after it thought he would be retained. They hired a new GM from the Green Bay Packers tree in John Eric Sullivan, and perhaps the emphasis on draft and develop is coming to South Florida because they really, really need it. Ownership is generally pretty absent, and they do meddle at the wrong time, but I don't consider it a bad job per se, but it's not a good job either. There's really no established organizational philosophy or fossil print. There really isn't a history to latch onto. This is a team that has a long way to go in order to contend. And in recent years, there isn't a whole lot of proof that it'll actually get to the finish line of that plan. Quarterback is certainly at the top of the list, and the Dolphins right now are currently over the cap by about $7 million. So they are in the red. But this is before they maneuver with the money a little bit. All right. So that is number 6. Number 7. I said the Atlanta Falcons, after Michael Penix tore his ACL, I said they were screwed. No first round pick this year, an overpriced old quarterback in Kirk Cousins, and their future quarterback is out for the foreseeable future. This is a disaster. And the crazy part is that it almost resulted in them making the playoffs, but for a weird tiebreaker that took place after they had been eliminated for weeks. But I do have to ask this question. Bill Belichick was a contender for this job, but they opted to hire Raheem Morris instead. And then after 2 seasons, they fired him along with GM Terry Fontenot, who was there since 2021. In the last 5 seasons, 3 with Arthur Smith, 7-10, 7-10, 7-10, and then the last 2 seasons, 8-9 and 8-9 with Raheem Morris. Bill Belichick would have been good for at least that the last 2 years, and he would probably still be your coach. You probably wouldn't have sacrificed a first-round pick for a defensive player, and your quarterback situation would be better. I would say to anyone that counters that point, ignore what's going on at UNC. I think these situations are independent of one another, and the Falcons would not be worse with Bill Belichick. Certainly not with that offensive talent, and certainly not with how that defense performed later in the year. As it relates to ownership is actually pretty solid. Arthur Blank has done nothing to indicate dysfunction. However, there is something that is obviously wrong for a team that is consistently average. They're not bad. They haven't bottomed out. They haven't been good. They're just in the middle. They're meh, right? Mid, as the kids are calling it. And that speaks to some sort of an organizational block. Now, it's always interesting when you see that X consulting firm has been hired to do a dive into the organization of an NFL team. I challenge the efficacy of that, and it's never a good sign if that is the route you're going, but they are trying something that a few teams have tried to do, and that is when you're hoping for a breakthrough, you try to bring back the glory days, and they hire a franchise legend to be in the front office. So enter Matt Ryan, who is now the president of football operations. The concern that I would have here, if somebody is going to take this job, is he's been on TV since his playing career ended. It was a great career, but he's never coached and he's never been in a front office role of any kind. So what are we really leaning on here? The people who have done these jobs, they will say it's very difficult. And on its face, I understand the move, but we also have to acknowledge that this is a risk. For every John Elway that worked out in Denver, there's a Matt Millen that failed in Detroit. Yes, John Lynch has worked out well in San Francisco, but Dan Marino was the VP of football ops for a couple of weeks before saying, yeah, this is not for me, and he chose to back out. Legends translating their success to other aspects of their sport doesn't always go well. It's a mixed bag. Again, see my earlier comments on Tom Brady and Michael Jordan. So you've got a bad quarterback situation. You don't have a lot of cap space, around $4 million. Unknown in the front office, which means there might be a different structure because they still need to hire a general manager and a coach, and they've got no first round pick. The good news is that the division is pretty weak. Again, they were 1 game out from winning it, and they won 4 straight to end the year. Ownership is good, but with the quick hook of the previous regime, that gives me a little bit of pause. No particular order with these last 3, 5 through 7, because again, eye of the beholder. You could talk yourself into why each job is good. You can also look at them and say, yeah, that's a little bit too much, and I don't think I would want that. All right. That leads us to number 8. the Arizona Cardinals. And I consider this to be the worst job that is on the market because the Cardinals themselves are awful. They have never had a coach longer than 4 years, and even their recent burst of success are outliers. 2018 to now, they one and done Josh Rosen and Steve Wilkes. We've seen Cliff Kingsbury and Jonathan Gannon in separate stints. The GM is staying, which makes sense. Monty Ossenfort, much like most GMs, do get a chance to hire a second coach, but there is something about this team that never seems to work. Kyler Murray's on his way out. Not an issue. Again, we've talked about quarterback contracts. They will be able to get out from this if they want to. But they had a horrible season. They were 3-14. They have a really good tight end, a few pieces here and there. And similar to the Raiders, they're in a division where they are the clear last place team, and it's not even close. I don't know a way out for them. Like, I could at least talk my way into saying each of the teams that I've listed before them have a path towards some prosperity in 26. I have no idea what that is for the Cardinals. They don't pay top dollar for coaches. Ownership is questionable, and I would say that certainly based on the NFLPA's report cards at the minimum. I don't know if it's a rebuild, but it's certainly not a roster ready to compete. And if you are stuck in that middle territory of we're not bad enough that we have to tear it down, but we're not good enough that we can win it all, you find yourself putting Band-Aids on a lot of situations. And I don't know how you rationalize just being in the middle of it. I don't see this team being much better, but again, it is the NFL. I could be totally wrong, and we've got a lot that could happen between now and the fall. But right now, I don't see this as a desirable job. It's never really been a desirable job, and I don't really know where to go from here. So, look, it pays, right? And I think we've looked at all these different jobs, if we're looking outside of coaching, where it's like, I could do it. But again, there's a reason that's open. They have a good amount of cap space, about $44 million, and they have all their draft picks. That's about it on that one. All right. So that is it. Those are the 8 openings. But I do have a bonus round because we still have a few that could find themselves open. As of right now, this is Monday. These have not been, these are not vacancies, is what I'm saying. So this is speculation, and it's based off of just really, again, historical context, some similar situations and scenarios, and ultimately expectations falling short. And this first one is the Green Bay Packers. Now, the reports are that they are working on trying to find a way to stay together, but until the contract is done, we've seen crazier things happen in the NFL. Again, not insider information here, but this doesn't feel like it's on solid ground. The components of a coaching extension. Teams don't like coaches to go into the last year of their contract. It can just get very weird, especially if things don't go well during that season. You really don't have many options, especially if you maybe want to split ways. Things go well enough, but they don't go great. You can potentially trade the coach. And I think that's where we might be here with Matt LaFleur. If any other jobs open up, Matt LaFleur could be a trade candidate, and the Packers would be wise to get some compensation for him because he is a coach. He's a very successful coach, and he's been to the playoffs more often than not. If the Packers job for some reason did open up as a result of Matt LaFleur being traded, or they couldn't come to terms with a contract extension, it would be number 2 behind Baltimore just because of the quarterback position. Jordan Love is very good. He's not Lamar Jackson. But in terms of stability, the Packers don't even have an owner. They have a CEO. They've got a board. They are the hallmark of a stable franchise. They don't make rash decisions. They draft and develop very well. Beyond the Packers, it would be the Steelers, the Pittsburgh Steelers. And they could easily be in the position that the Ravens are in had they lost in Week 18. Now, if they lose to Houston at home tonight, again, recording this on a Monday, if it came open, this would be the 3rd job on the list, assuming Green Bay was open and Baltimore was open. It's a stable franchise with great ownership. 3 coaches in 50 years. They are exceedingly patient. This would be a true rebuild, though, because the organization is set for a reset. However, it would be an opportunity to reboot itself, a historic franchise that has a clear vision for itself, and that would be very attractive to the right candidate. All right. The next one's the Philadelphia Eagles. I don't think this will happen, but Doug Peterson also lost his job after winning a Super Bowl. Philadelphia is a weird sports city. Nick Sirianni is an interesting fit in that whole ecosystem. And it just seems like every other year it's just whiplash back and forth. This happened after they lost to the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, and they had a very strange, dark year the year after. The front office is elite, but this seems to be an environment that seems to cook coaches to a crisp. And if Sirianni was let go, another team would pick him up pretty quickly, just at the minimum because he won a Super Bowl. Now, people can question Sirianni as a coach all they want, but again, he's won a Super Bowl, and he's done it with, if people talk the way they do, he's done it with some parts that maybe people don't view the highest of, certainly at the quarterback position. I am not that person. I think Jalen Hurts is a pretty solid quarterback and the rightful leader of that team. But if you're going to give Sirianni a pass, then that could be a reason for doing so. If this job were to be open, it would be in the second tier, in my opinion. I think they have a little bit of work to do. They've got some parts that they have to make, and it would be whether or not the coach coming in is comfortable with certain aspects of that staff. I don't think you let Vic Fangio as a defensive coordinator go. That defense plays very hard for him, and he is clearly one of the best defensive minds in the game. So really good job, but a tick below some of the others that are open or would potentially come open. And that leaves us with the last one, the Buffalo Bills. I think if the Buffalo Bills had lost over the weekend, the job would be open today. But to not have the Chiefs in the playoffs this year, no Ravens, no real threat to them that has been a threat in the past, the minimum would be the AFC Championship game. And a loss in Denver next week could still spell doom for Sean McDermott, who in this cycle would get a job if he absolutely wanted it. This would be tied for the top job available along for Baltimore if it came open, simply because of the MVP and Josh Allen you have at quarterback, and with the right coaching would absolutely bust through the door and win a championship. So that is all I got. That was a lot, but we got through it. And it was, looking at the clock, we're at about 30-ish minutes, so it's a little too early to look at the hot seat for next year, but there are many that pop to mind, including some of the ones that I just mentioned in the bonus round. If all those coaches are back next year, it's not going to get cooler for them. I will say that. But let's enjoy football for now. We've got a few weeks left, and then we're going to be longing for it to return once again. So, as always, if anything resonates, like, subscribe, engage. Check out the website for resources. I definitely made a couple of tweaks to it. There's some projects. And, of course, hang out with me on social media. For a deeper dive, subscribe to the newsletter. Again, it's got a tea of the month. It's a good time. Conversations like this are the core of OIAS, which is all about empowering people from the outside in. Remember, I can't save the world, but I can do my best not to make it a worse place. So until next time, stay safe, stay sane, and we will get you in the next one.